Okay, I'm Joe. He's Nick, and that was pretty exciting introduction music, theme music, and good for the next segment because what we want to do is we want to get into this segment of this week's show, talking a little bit about the ongoing saga of the presidential elections in the United States. And everything that's going on down there right now with conspiracy theories floating around, accusations of voter fraud, counter accusations of trying to stir up people's anger and frustration, and on 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 and on. I could go on and on myself, but you know where it stands right now, Nick, as you know, is that the It looks like, according to the counting, which isn't official yet, and we can get into that in a second, what makes it official, but the way that the vote count stands right now, it looks like Joe Biden, he's definitely in the lead, and most outlets, most news outlets, and commentators now are saying he is going to be the next president of the United States. But of course the Trump side is saying, okay, you know, voter fraud. And there have been a number of allegations made. There are a number of court cases now that are pending on it. So I don't know. I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is it's so much better the way we do our elections here, Nick, I have to tell you, because we still use paper ballots in Canada. They're still counted by hand, at least in federal elections. Okay. There's no ballot machines. Yes, you could go and do early voting. You could do, there are provisions for mail-in ballots, etc. But everything is standardized, and it all comes down to ballots being counted by flesh and blood human beings, one ballot at a time, the paper ballot. There's no hanging chads, punched holes. It's all standardized. You mark the ballot. It's clear who you're voting for. If it's not clear who you're voting for, the ballot is spoiled. End of story. And at the end of the day, once the votes are counted, every polling station reports the number of ballots for each candidate. Those are tabulated at the riding level, which would be like the district level in the United States, and then the winner is announced. And the ballots are preserved for a period of time in case there's a need for a recount or there's allegations of fraud, etc. So we don't have the same potential for mass problems here in Canada that they seem to have in the United States.
It is one of the things that I take a little bit of pride in, is how fast we can find out who's going to be in the big chair for the next 4 or 5 years, or less if it's a minority. There's certainly no question about the fact that in this instance our system seems to be the better of the two. Like, why would you ever entertain the idea? First of all, it's unfortunate that we have to have these kinds of conversations in 2020 to decide, you know, the allegations of voter fraud and the threat of violence if the vote goes the wrong way, and just on and on and on. Those things, I believe, are tragic that we have to talk about them in the first place. But I also think that Trump was certainly within his rights to demand recounts where it's close, and if there are suggestions of allegations of voter fraud, to look into them, because you have the biggest chair on the planet up for grabs, and I think that you want to make sure that the people who have a say in that election actually get a say. So that's if I was Trump, I probably would be following the same course of action for a number of reasons. There've already been at least one gubernatorial race or Senate race, I can't remember which one, that went from Democrat back to Republican because of voting irregularities. Well, if that can happen at that level, that means it's possible, theoretically at least, that it's happened on a bigger level. So what's going to how this is going to play out, I don't know. My gut tells me that we know who the president's going to be, and for good or for bad, for the next 4 years, it's going to be Joe Biden. Now, fortunately, it looks like the Senate and the Congress will at least have enough red in them to keep the democratically Joe Biden and his radical agenda at bay. Things like a mandatory across-the-board mask mandate, or this new clean energy deal, where he's taking a page out of FDR's book, but using the climate, to the climate scare to try to manipulate it, where he wants an end to oil as close to overnight as he can get it. He wants to wage war on the car industry. He wants, everybody else but him to pay their fair share. It just goes on and on and on. And if he gets any of these major things passed, it's going to have a huge impact, not only in the United States, but on us as well. So that's the one, if there's a silver lining in this for a conservative point of view, it's the fact that there should be some control in place if the Republicans act like Republicans and stand up to Mr. Biden and tell him, no, you can't do that when it comes to trying to pass his legislation through the House and the Senate. Then we'll probably get through this okay. But if they start infighting and playing politics and looking for pork for the ridings and all those kind of things, then we're in big trouble.
But I want to go back to the whole idea of voter fraud. I'm not, as you know, Nick, a conspiracy theorist, and many of our listeners, particularly here in Canada on the conservative side, I hear from them from time to time. They think that I'm not conservative enough, if you will. I don't play team politics or partisan politics quite as diligently or obsessively as some of my friends do. I don't see it as my team versus their team. I think that conservatism, genuine conservatism, tends to rise above the my team versus their team approach to politics. Not entirely, but close. But so as I say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I will say this much, okay? I don't think that there's any question that there has been voter fraud, and in some cases, based on some of the evidence that I have seen emerging, or the allegations, and when I say the allegations, I haven't personally seen any of the evidence, but many of the allegations include evidence that is going to be presented in some kind of a courtroom at some point in time. And so I assume that the evidence that they're talking about in some of these actual cases now is genuine, and in some cases it's pretty significant, some of the fraud that appears to have gone on. And so I'm thinking, okay, yeah, is it enough that it would change the outcome of the election? I don't know. Okay. Totally reserve judgment on that. I don't know. But what bothers me, just to finish the thought, Nick, what I find the most surprising is the vehement denial that there's any evidence. And it's almost as though, there's a certain willful blindness to this on the part of people on for want of a better way of describing it, people on the left, supporters of Biden. And I go back to, let me go back, wind the clock back 3 weeks now, 3.5 weeks, to when the stories were emerging about this laptop that apparently had belonged to Hunter Biden, and that there was evidence that he was involved in some ne'er-do-well kind of schemes in China in particular. And there was evidence apparently on this laptop, and that Joe Biden and other members of the family were implicated, etc. And other witnesses came forward. And now here's the thing: the laptop exists, and the laptop was in the possession of the FBI, and the FBI was conducting some kind of an investigation, although they never really comment on what kind of an investigation that they're engaged in. But anyway, so I think this is important news. I think this is big news. Okay. So the American networks and Twitter and Facebook are censoring this story, and they're not only are they censoring the story, but they're explaining why they're censoring the story. Now, that's by way of background to the observation I'm about to make. The observation I'm about to make is this: how do you defend censoring a story that you say doesn't exist? In other words, I'm hearing from these commentators going, there is no evidence of corruption. These are false allegations. Trump makes another accusation without any evidence to back it up. Okay? And this is what we're hearing with respect to the voter fraud as well, except that you're censoring the very stories and the very evidence, and you're justifying censoring the evidence that you say doesn't exist. Nick, I'm genuinely at a loss to explain this. Is this simply, is this really left-wing demagoguery? Okay, or is something else at play here? I mean, it's Whoopi Goldberg. We were talking about this during our meeting, our pre-show meeting, where Whoopi Goldberg goes on television and says, to Trump supporters, "Oh, come on, you guys, suck it up like we did after Trump won the election." And as you quite rightly pointed out, these guys didn't suck it up. Certainly Whoopi Goldberg didn't suck it up. Does she really believe what she's saying? So there's it's more than just deception. It's self-deception. And I don't know. I just don't know how else to explain it, Nick. It's very disturbing.
Let me throw this into the mix. This is the same group that was saying that in this whole Russian interference in the election thing, because there's no evidence, we simply must investigate. And this has been a mantra in more than just
good point.
The Trump hunt, to try to bring down a sitting president. If you remember the scandal involving women making allegations against men, whether they're founded or unfounded, we have to believe the victim. And because there's no evidence, we must investigate. Wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. If that's the case, if you want to stick to that, then because there's no evidence of voter fraud, we must investigate, to use your logic. They seem to have completely forgotten everything they've been saying for the last 4 years. It's because there's no evidence that they wanted. They couldn't. CNN was caught saying the whole Russian story was a nothing burger. I remember the guy, one of the producers of CNN, making that statement, and that's because there was nothing there. The whole thing was created out of thin air. So, but that didn't stop them from continuing to attack a sitting president. Now, look, it's one thing not to like the political leader of the day. That's fair. Like, I don't like our particular leader here in Canada either. But that does not give me the right to continue for 4 and 5 and 6 years to impugn his family, to make absolutely unrealistic claims about anything that I think might be going on. There has to be some substance to it. And if there's not, what's that old saying? It's one thing to know it's true, it's another thing to prove it. Unless you can